Cool. So the idea behind today is that we have a nice chat about mobility, predominantly in and around how it gets applied to strength sports and how it's used. So what I want, does everybody that isn't within the Crazy Strength gang, are you all aware? I know Dean is clearly very aware of who I am. Matt knows who I am. Joe, do you know who I am and what I do and all that sort of stuff? Thumbs up or thumbs down is fine. Oh no, you know, James knows exactly who I am as well. He's been abused by me too many times. Good. So what I won't do is I won't bore you all with loads of introductions and that sort of stuff. So it's kind of, this topic has spiked off the back of a lot of discussions within the group that we've had. I've got maybe 45 odd lifters within a nice little WhatsApp group. Lots of rubbish gets spouted a lot of time, lots of banter goes down, but there is some serious conversation. And the use or not use of mobility to an extent crops up quite nicely. Quite a few of us within the group are a big fan of mobility. Some aren't a big fan, Dave. But there is reasons behind some needing it, some not needing it, some using it and some not using it. So ideally what I want to try and do is have a discussion around what mobility is, what my beliefs are, what my understandings are towards it, what I believe needs to be used for certain sports and certain athletes, depending upon the athlete. And it depends is probably going to be one of the biggest things. Just waiting for Dean to start nodding, but it depends is probably going to be the biggest thing that's going to crop up throughout pretty much the whole thing. But what I want to do is, and the reason why I've done it like this is, I'm not a massive fan. There's loads of really good pages, Dean's being one of them, that puts out loads of information on these exercises, this is how you perform them, and all that sort of stuff. I prefer to have discussion and be able to have, if people don't understand or want a little bit more context behind it, they can then ask questions and ask for clarity behind it. So it gives a good opportunity to do so. So, mobility. What is mobility? Mobility is kind of, it's a bit of a buzzword at the moment, and it's encaptured by three things. Mobility being one of them, and it's of those three things, it is the one thing at the moment that everybody seems to associate with. You have flexibility within that, and you have stability within that. Those three things, in my mind, or those two things come together to make kind of mobility. So what I want to do is spend 2 minutes to kind of explain to you exactly what those three things are, how those three things kind of work together seamlessly, which will give you a better idea of when an athlete needs one of those things. I've seen a lot of things going out, certainly on Instagram and Facebook, on you don't need mobility because of this, or science says this. Well, science is great and science works really nicely, depending on where the research has been done, who's been used, and how it's applied and how you can apply it as a coach. So I want to try and be that kind of middleman of, this is kind of where the science is, this is where it says. What I don't want to do is spend all my time trying to bamboozle you with really long words. I'm going to try and keep that to a minimum unless you tell me you want more. And then I'll try and simplify as it goes. So flexibility is nice and simple. It is 9 times out of 10, it is one singular muscle and the range of movement that one muscle has. So if you have, for example, tight hamstrings, you need to do some form of flexibility to increase the range of movement of that hamstring muscle. Fairly simple. Mobility is the range of movement that a singular joint can go through. So if you have good mobility of the shoulder, it goes through all of the ranges of movements and the paths and patterns that it can do. If you can't go through that movement, is it for a certain reason, which is the sort of things we'll kind of come to and what those reasons are and why that might happen. So the last one is stability. Now, this one obviously is very pertinent. Obviously, the two sports that I am predominantly involved in are weightlifting and powerlifting, amongst other bits and bobs. Do a bit of rugby stuff, do a bit of cycling stuff as well. A lot of people mistake mobility and stability for prescription-based stuff, certainly with coaches who will suggest that an athlete needs to be more mobile going through a certain range of movement, when actually the smaller musculature within and in and around the joint isn't stable enough to hold that point. It's more popular within the weightlifting side of things, but it does happen in the powerlifting side of things. Obviously, with a squat, you need to have both stable spinal support with the intra-abdominal pressure and things that you need to provide, as well as through your shoulder girdle and your hip girdle, predominantly those two big ball and socket joints. So the next point is, and you'll probably see on here, because I've got a reverse camera, you can't see exactly what is on here. If you want it, I can put a picture of that in there. I can send you a picture of it. That's no dramas. Kind of my note to a madman that I made earlier. Didn't end up sending it to you, Dean. I probably should have done. Sorry, dude. So, reflective discussion and range of movement. We have two different types of, certainly for the flexibility side of things, we have active and passive stretching. So you look at an active, sitting into a single leg forward fold for that hamstring. Active is allowing your body weight to fall forward. Passive is getting hold of that leg and pulling yourself forwards into it. Give me 2 seconds. I'm going to double check that's not someone. No, we're all good.
Someone called Kate trying to get in.
Hold on. I can even operate WhatsApp at the same time. So your flexibility, for example, if you don't have the right range or amount of mobility, range of movement, for example, in a shoulder joint, in receiving a snatch. So a lot of people end up receiving a snatch forwards. It could be a number of things, but if it is mobility and they can't get that shoulder into that correct position, why is it that they can't get it into that position? Do you need mobility? Do you need flexibility? Or do you need stability? So your key checkpoints for there, and it's probably one of the key takeaway things I want to kind of give you guys to take away, is you need to have that self-assessment checklist. Can your joint physically get into that range of movement? No. If your joint can't get into that range of movement, cool. Glenn is in. If you can't get into that range of movement, it is probably because you have tight musculature somewhere that is impinging the joint and restricting you from getting into that position. So you might need to do some kind of static stretching. You might need to do some kind of active or passive stretching. Dynamic is predominantly more for warm-ups and all that sort of stuff. I'm kind of going to brush over that because I make an assumption that we all know that sort of stuff. If your shoulder can get into that range of movement, not under load, can it get into that position under load? If it can get into that position over load, then it's probably not going to be mobility. It's probably not going to be flexibility. It's going to be stability. So you're going to need to work on getting your shoulder joint, your hip joint, in a stable position. Does that make sense? Pause and have a drink. So, most people, we got one more coming in. Most people who think they have a mobility issue, it's normally initially some kind of restriction in the joint. So we should be having a look at testing what range of movement you have, or you then look to decide whether it's mobility, flexibility, or whether it's a stability issue. Cool. So what I don't want to do is spend loads of time going over all that sort of thing. What I want to do for the next kind of 20 minutes, including fending off questions from you guys, which hopefully you have, is I want to look at how mobility can and could and how it should be used from a coaching perspective as well as an athlete's perspective when it comes to the sport specific. So the biggest question that comes up is, how much mobility do you need? Most of you have all come across that before, yeah? You're probably all muted. Some mute, hold on. Now you should all be unmuted. Cool, so everybody here.
Chaos!
Good. I'm more than happy that you have your mics open, guys. I don't mind a little bit of back noise. I want questions. I want you guys interacting with me as well. So for example, powerlifting and weightlifting, which demands more mobility?
Powerlifting.
Which is why you don't do any, Dave. Good, so I'm going to go back to my original answer. The answer is it depends. It depends on what range of movement you have now, what your flexibility is like already, and what the goal is. So most of those, and I'm going to go powerlifting before I go to Olympic lifting. Here, all the powerlifters here, who just put your hand up if you are a high bar squatter. Now put your hands up if you are a low bar squatter. Cool. So those two that have put their hands up for high bar squats, you've tried low bar squats before, yeah?
Not really, no.
Oh, it's coming, Kate. It's coming. I'm sorry. Glenn, I know
It's not a low bar squatter yet, Kate.
You would.
So, all those that have tried or already doing low bar squats, how easy is it to get your shoulder into that low bar squat position?
Depends on how much you've warmed up. To start with, not very easy.
So when you first do low bar squats, it's not easy to get into that position.
Yeah.
Pretty easy when your hands are out this wide.
What are you gobbling off that, superstar?
When your hands are this wide, it's pretty easy.
I think I started with suicide grip as well.
Yeah, so a lot of people will do that because they don't have the range of movement. So you can use the skill, which is a way of developing that range of movement and mobility, and that skill will slowly develop that range of movement, or you can work on the tissue. I will lean on Dean a little bit in a few minutes because I know he has done a lot with the myofascial stuff. But you can then work the tissue and work the movement so you can get the range of movement to then hold that position. Does that make sense? Perfect. So, I'm going to do what I anticipate being my only geeky bit of advice. Who here has heard of sliding filament theory? I knew Dina giggled. So we have something called sliding filament theory. I'm going to try and keep it as low a level as possible, but within your muscle fibers, you have two filaments, one that slides over the top of the other. They have an optimal position to be in, or an optimum space to be in, to elicit a maximal force from that muscle tissue. Obviously, we can increase the amount of recruitment that we have of those contractile elements through the training and the neural training that we have. One fiber can only elicit a certain amount of force, depending on the size of it and its cross-sectional area. So, if the sliding filament is in a certain position to elicit the most force, if it becomes too tight and slides over too much, it then becomes dysfunctional and isn't able to elicit as much force as it was because it can't go through the range of movement that it needs to go to. If it's the other way and it's too loose and too limber, it then isn't able to maximize that amount of force. So when the question of, and there's no way of finding out without cutting people open, how much is enough and how much is too much, it's a suck and see theory. And I'm going to give you two examples of this. Dave being one of them. Dave, correct me if I'm wrong, Dave, ex-gymnast?
Yep.
Ex-gymnast. So in his past, his ability to elicit maximal power through joints is decent anyway. I found out this the hard way when I programmed him handstand press-ups and he knocked out a set of 20. What an arsehole.
Light work.
And then he just started knocking out handstands and sent me the video. Thanks, Dave. Forgot to mention that. But his ability to go through range within the joint was already there. So the reason why Dave has had a pretty successful career over, how long have you been lifting, Dave? 8 years?
6.
6 years powerlifting specific. He's already had his joints gapped in a good position. So his corner sockets aren't in a bad position. They are centered within the joint, ready to elicit force. But Dave does minimal mobility, flexibility work. Does quite a lot of stability work, certainly for bench and shoulders. Does lots of tempo and stability work for squat, but doesn't do any specific mobility work. Sunita, however, bearing in mind these two individuals are both the current world champions of geography powerlifting, Sunita does and loves yoga. she has a tight lower back, and I'll talk about Tilley in a minute. Sunita has a tight lower back, which is prone to tension and causes injury from that reason. So she needs to do a lot of mobility and maintain that side of things. That is an individual requirement. So it's not that she isn't flexible enough. She has that flexibility. She needs to ease the tension because her musculature is overactive. So the tissue needs easing off. Tilley is the complete opposite. Tilley will pancake and she will have her legs splayed and her chest on the floor, and she's looking up as if to say, is that it? She is hypermobile. For those that haven't made an assumption already and have seen Tilley on the Instagram side of things, she is pretty hypermobile. She is naturally very pliable through her joints and her connective tissue. So she has a natural advantage against all of us. Sonny Webster's another one to put out there as well. I'm recording it, so I'm going on record. Sonny Webster is hypermobile, so the reason he is so good at performing so many really good mobility exercises is because physiologically he has an advantage already. He probably spent more time bench pressing as a weightlifter to tighten up his shoulder girdle to make sure he can dislocate his shoulder, rather than having to do all the mobility that he's prescribing to a lot of people and making a good amount of money from.
What about Trent? Was that prescribed?
No, that was in his supplements or in the burgers that he ate. Now, careful, Dave. I don't want any lawsuits coming out after this one. So we look at the sliding filament theory and we look at each athlete. Each athlete, Dave, Sunita and Tilley, all three of them are really good athletes in their own right. Each have different fiber types. Tilley is naturally explosive. Dave is naturally explosive. Sunita is a little bit slower. She's not naturally as explosive. Liv, I'm not going to come to you. It's fine. Don't panic. But you look at where that musculature is on that sliding filament theory. One is either too long, one is either too tight, and one is perfect. It's hard to find that balance. And unless you're going to cut someone open, because cadaver don't flex, there's no contractile. There is contractile tissue within a cadaver or a dead human. But to get them able to flex is almost impossible. To elongate the muscle is possible. That's kind of the only real sciencey thing I'm going to go into. Pulling me into it. So how much is too much? It depends. It depends on the individual and the requirements of that individual. It also depends on the sport. Powerlifting and weightlifting, whilst are very similar, they are both also very different. Powerlifting isn't as absolutely powerful, it's more absolute strength work, as opposed to Olympic lifting, which is much more kind of explosive, powerful sport. So the irony of the terms mean that the requirements are slightly different. So there's much more explosion in that weightlifting. The requirement, Tilley's on both. So Tilley does a little bit more ballistic, fast speed work, whereas Dave and Sunita tend to, and this is my programming opinion, they tend to only do speed work in the 6 to 8 weeks leading up to a competition, when looking at maximizing fiber progress within a program from a physiological adaptation phase. They're not going to make any more adaptation. So the speed work and the neural contraction is what we can then kind of gain from that. Injury risk. This was one I think went on Instagram. I've probably seen 3 or 4 of these over the last 2 weeks of people suggesting that for weightlifters and powerlifters, mobility is a risk injury, or an injury risk. If you are too mobile, you are going to get injured. If you do too much mobility, you will get injured. So do mobility. How often do you guys lift? I'm going to make an assumption. In fact, let's do this the easy way. Keep your cameras where they are. Stand up. Everyone stand up.
Am I going to turn around?
Oh, the Shreddosaurus is out. Dean, you can stay sat down, mate, because I know how often you train, you crazy fool. Good. So I would like everybody to sit down.
Is everybody wearing pants?
If you train less than 3 times a week. Perfect. Everybody sit down.
I mean,
mean, at the moment, it's not really.
Let's take coronavirus to an exception. It's just not going to happen with a coronavirus involved. But
And the
normally
illegal
we're
barbell
probably
work.
we are minimum strength training 3 times a week, minimum, if not 4 to 5 sessions a week, and you're probably going to do some kind of conditioning. Yes, powerlifters, I said conditioning. I will wash my mouth out later. We can probably do that conversation another day as well. So if you've spent 5 sessions a week training, probably absolute power, you're probably tightening up your musculature and your joints, therefore shortening your range of movement whilst getting stronger. You're going to be really hard pressed to do enough mobility to undo that. Most powerlifters and weightlifters I know, Tilley's pretty good. She'll do a good 40 minutes to 45 minutes a day of mobility work, normally yoga and things like that. There's reasons behind that, and I will give you those reasons. The odds on you undoing all that strength work is going to be slim. However, if you find you cannot keep tension in your hips or in your shoulders within the bottom of a position, it's going to be of 2 reasons. Your joint capsule may be too lax and you don't have enough tension, so you may have overdone mobility. It's possible. It's probably more likely you're not stable enough in that position and you can't fire the joints or fire the musculature that needs to work to keep that stable position. So most powerlifters that you'll see a butt wink, it's probably laziness. It's probably because your hamstrings and your glutes are so wired up that your butt wink kicks in, you can't keep that neutral position in the spine at the bottom, and it's not going to allow you to, it's going to pull under and lose that lower lumbar spine. So a lot of people will lose that lumbar position. The lumbar position lost in a squat is a bad thing. Your thoracic position loss in a heavy deadlift or a squat is okay, so long as it's not through range of movement. Does that make sense? Yeah? Cool. So mobility is good, so long as it's done for the right reason. So that injury risk comes along a sliding scale. You also have to bear it in mind your kind of risk and reward situation as well. So if you've got that sliding scale of, and I've done it, anyone that's been on a workshop with me, I like to use a sliding scale of maximizing performance, minimizing that injury risk. So when you're looking to maximize performance and you want as much tension as possible, then you need to minimize that flexibility and mobility through that joint, so long as you can still A, hit the position, and that B, that joint is healthy. If that joint isn't healthy, then you're going to risk longevity in the sport. Now, those of you in the room, apart from Dave, who I know isn't drug-free, who are drug-free, those of you who are drug-free know that strength sports are a long shot. If you're not in a strength sport for at least 4 years, and you've made very good progress in less than about 4 years looking at national or international standards, you've probably taken some opportunity to gain strength elsewhere supplementally. Dave, stop looking at Kate. She only did it once, right?
And I didn't take anything.
No
So
comment.
you have to look at the risk and reward. How much risk can you take at the level that your athlete is at, and how much do they want to risk? And I know this is something that both Mark and Dean will be able to probably back me up on. Working with athletes, you have to have that relationship with an athlete to understand what they're in for. Why are they there? Dave and Sunita last year, we had a discussion 2 months out where I went, you two have a chance, if injury-free and everything goes well, that you will place in the top 3 in the world. How much risk do you want to take to make that pull? Whereas I've got 8 to 10 newish lifters that are only doing their first couple of competitions. Do I want them taking the same risks as Sunita and Dave would do? Absolutely not. It's not worth the risk. We focus on good movement. We focus on minimizing that injury risk, making sure joint capsules are safe, making sure that they don't have anything impinged. Glads, that is a sexy look. Cool. So we
Fitness.
longevity. Have you earned that, Glads?
All the Easter eggs, all of them.
So the other really big thing I like to put out for the mobility side of things, and it's got nothing to do with the physiological side of things. It has everything to do with the psychological side of things. I know full well, and it's one that, depending on when we do the arousal discussion, Tilley will be one that I will bring up, and it will be the same story, and I will probably brush over it a little bit more. However, I've known Tilley for about 5 years. I knew her originally as an RAF powerlifter, and when I first met her, I was coaching for the Army powerlifting team. I was officiating as well, and somewhere in the warm-up area was a massive female scream. It sounded like someone was either just been shot, or they were about to murder someone. On comes this epically strong ginger young lady who had a very good bench then, had a decent squat and decent deadlift, but would scream as if she was going to throat punch someone as soon as she came on the platform. The discussion I had with her 2 years after that was, "Why the fuck were you screaming? What was that about?" And he went, "Well, I'd just seen everybody else do it, so I figured that's what was supposed to do." And I said, "Well, how did it work for you?" Didn't work at all. I don't get it. So I know Dean has seen my relationship with Tilley firsthand at competition at the Combined Services. A couple have that maybe came to the Olympic lifting we went to before. When Tilley trains now, she doesn't talk to anyone. When Tilley warms up, she has her headphones in, she won't talk to anyone. She doesn't even know what's on the bar. I put everything on the bar. I put the plates on the bar. I tell her what's going on the competition bar. I do everything. She has no idea what's going on. The only person she speaks to is me, and that's it until she finishes competition. Then
I think she's in the wrong team.
Hey?
She's in the wrong team.
Yeah. She's on her own team at that point. And I will come to that actually, guys, because it's a really interesting point. But we do emanate around people that are very similar. And anyone that's met Tilley, not at training and not at a competition, will suggest that she's the same as most of the lifters that tend to emanate towards me, in that they're very amicable, they're very talkative, they're very caring, they want to share traits that I kind of hang my hat on that are very important to me. And Tilley is one of those, until Tilley has to put Tilley first, and then it's completely different. But my point originally was that the person that she thought she needed to be originally 5 years ago, when I was asked to coach her before and refused to do so because she wasn't ready to be coached, isn't the person she is now, and the person she is now has accepted who she is and how she functions and things like that. The mental health side of things has been a massive thing for myself and Tilley to work with, and it's something that I have done with a good handful of the people that are in the call, let alone people that are in and around both the Army and the crazy strength side of things. The mobility side of things, and I do mobility, I enjoy ROM-WOD. I have a really short temper. It's not something I'm terribly proud of at times, and it's something that most people that know me that I'm very laid back, very personable, very talkative, until I snap, and then I just lose it. That's it, it's gone. So mobility for me, personally, helps me keep level-headed, keeps me cool. The only time I'm ever like that is when I approach a bar. And it's internal rather than external. But it's taken me a good 15 years. Nobody's allowed to mention age at all. A good 15 years to kind of manage that and kind of come through that side of things. So Tilley, although Tilley doesn't need to do mobility, she is more than mobile enough. However, one of the biggest things for me, and we've gone slightly off of the mobility side of things, one of the biggest things for me is how does that mobility fit with the bigger picture of the athlete? If they don't need to do mobility, but they need to keep mentally focused, and mobility is a tool that they use to make them a better athlete on the platform as well as in life, then why should they not do mobility just because science says they shouldn't do mobility? That's you as a coach. That's your problem to then make sure that they don't overcompensate that side of things. Does that make sense?
Yep.
I feel like we should make screaming mandatory.
It's a shame Scott's not here today. He's a bit under the weather today. I thank you, Liv, for touching base earlier, by the way. I have touched base with him, but famously, I'll see if I can dig out the example. But he PB'd his sumo deadlift at a crazy strength gathering and mandatory screamed.
He didn't. He fucking dropped it. He CrossFit PB'd it. He did a big scream and then like threw it on the floor because he's a CrossFitter.
You can't say CrossFit PB in front of Dean. It's not fair.
It's a CrossFit
Well,
PB.
did he sumo? Was it a PB
Oh, no,
sumo
Gary.
using bumpers?
What, Scott?
Cool. So I think I've gone through that about 1,000 miles an hour and brought out a lot of good points. Does
If you
it
do
cover?
say so yourself.
Did I say good points? Sorry, Liv. A lot of points. Have I covered what you wanted or expected to be covered? Do you have any questions? Yes, Olivia. We're like teacher.
I know that when we were at the MPS, Sarah very kindly did some physio for me between bench and deadlift. And one of the things you said to me at that point was that you could do too much to loosen the muscles too much. Is that to do with a similar theory, or is that completely something?
Yeah, that's interesting because, and Sarah, you can wade in at any point, mate. Don't feel like you're being rude. I want all the experts in the room to get all the knowledge out so that everybody gets everything, including me. You'll find a lot of people, certainly new lifters who have, and Dean, you might remember this. It's probably before your PT school career, but the original way of teaching squats from the PT school was that you have to have your feet shoulder width apart and your toes have to be forward. Yeah, I made that same smirk when they told me, but kind of ran with it a little bit. Played the game.
Myth.
Knees don't go in front of the toes.
Well,
There you go. He's got it. He's sussed it.
It depends. Sorry, Dave. But in doing so, when we started to actually teach squats properly, we had a whole bunch of people that had their knees deciding they wanted to really kiss each other in the bottom of a squat because they couldn't actually fire their glutes. So you had over-dominant quads, you had under-firing hamstrings and under-firing glutes. That wasn't a direct shot, Sarah, the physio. That's Sarah, the physio. That wasn't a direct
That wasn't
shot.
me. I did not put that on there.
I literally.
A lot of people don't understand how to fire their glutes because they've been focusing so much on the global larger muscles. Does that make sense?
I take the piss out of Claire pretty much every day for her knees.
I mean, Susie used to do exactly the same thing. Susie's.
I take the piss out of Suze as well.
Yeah, but Susie's squat's nearly prettier than yours, Dave.
Whoa.
I'll send you the vid, Dave.
4 out of 8.
Apart from today, the full frontal was required.
We did get a full frontal. Liv, does that answer your question? So I'll kind of caveat that with, I'm not a physio nor an ERI. So my knowledge is pretty good. I have a good amount of experience. Whereas Sarah is qualified for that. She's experienced in that. So the point at which I go, Liv, you're probably right. I'll go and see a decent physio that you trust. And it is, for me, the physio and ERI and sports therapists. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, go on, Sarah, go.
No. I was just hoping Liv was going to come back and see me again.
She is my physio.
She trusts, so I was a little bit sad.
Distance is a really, really hard thing, especially with the coronavirus. We're going to blame the coronavirus. But having a relationship with a physio or an ERI of some sort does help, especially when you know them and you develop a relationship with them, because I like to think I'm the first person to go, you know what, I know lots of stuff, but this bit's some stuff that I don't know. For those that have done any or asked nutrition stuff from me, that is more than just, here's a prescription of macros, this is what you should be looking at, this is what I recommend. I have a young lady, Lucy, that I work with at Middle Wallop, who is bodybuilding background and nutritionally qualified. She is very good. Am I wrong, Liv? She's very good and she gives a shit about that stuff, and I like beige food too much. And
She lets me have beer and chocolate on a Saturday night.
she let you have chocolate?
beer and chocolate.
Lucy is sacked.
What about fish and rice cakes?
John's not here for
Coffee and
fish and
chicken
rice
curry.
cakes.
Fish and rice cake.
Dino, have you got much to add? Oh,
It depends on the context of the question. Can you just repeat what you just said before? Was it Liv? Sorry, Liv. I couldn't quite hear the question that you asked. I just got the back end of it.
Yes, so I was at a competition between bench and deadlift, and I was quite tight in my physique and lower back. So Sarah did some physio for me, but she didn't do too much because she didn't want to leave herself off too much for the deadlift. And so I was just wondering whether that's the same theory as we just finished.
Yeah. So from a performance perspective, especially if sorry for those of you guys that don't know me, I'm Dean. Craig probably call me whatever he wants to call me, but yeah, we'll just go with Dean for now. So from a
Dean
performance
Hammond on
perspective,
Instagram.
you just plugged me. Sarah probably did, like Sarah's qualified. She's probably done exactly what was required and needed, especially in a scenario where you're in a competition, you're going from bench to squat, for example. If you're doing mobility, particularly between, especially for weightlifters, even powerlifters, I'm not going to talk about powerlifting too much because that's not my background. I deal with more sports performance and strength and conditioning, so it's a very different niche. But even from that perspective, from a powerlifting background, you doing too much static mobility between lifts is going to have a huge impact on your performance, and that's common knowledge. You wouldn't like. I'm assuming that when Sarah did some physio with you before, I'm pretty sure she didn't spend too long taking your joint into a position which it shouldn't be in, because otherwise that will have a detrimental effect on your performance overall. So a lot of people will often tend to do like deep tissue myofascial release, or they'll do like trig point therapy just to allow your muscle fibers to release slightly, or the spindles to release slightly. And that keeps that blood flow going through that muscle joint and somewhat keeps that capsule secure when you're going into a lift. So you take squat, for example, I wouldn't get, this is just thinking about it open-mindedly, I would never get a power lifter to do some random static glute stretch that is 3 to 4 minutes long between lifts, because that wouldn't assist that athlete in terms of a performance perspective. Potentially,
don't worry, no powerlifter would.
No. Well, that's good to hear. And I'm sure Craig and sorry, I don't know everybody's personality, but I'm sure Craig and Sarah would more than less likely, and Mark as well, will back me up and say, you know, static stretching is good in some respect, but from a physio's perspective, if you're performing and you've got a lift to go and do, you doing a static stretch is not gonna help you too much. I certainly wouldn't be doing it with my athletes in a weightlifting competition. I wouldn't get into static stretch. It'd just be stupid. Even working with track athletes, etc., because that hinders performance. Whereas things like myofascial release or trig point therapy might be a little bit more beneficial with you, because you're keeping that muscle somewhat firing. I'm not going to go geeky like Craig did. I'll keep it real simple. It's probably the best way to explain it. I don't know if that answers your question, but hopefully that helped a little bit.
No, absolutely. You've added to it. Obviously, knowing you've done a lot with the myofascial releasey stuff, in fact, I'll give my theories on what happens when you get knots and all that sort of stuff in the muscle. And if you've got anything to add, Dino, just jump in and add. Don't feel as though you're treading on your toes. Nothing like that, mate. More than happy to.
No, never, mate. Cool.
So, does everybody know what a knot is within the muscle? Perfect. So
it's like a tumbleweed.
Yeah.
Go
So when you have a knot in the muscle, it is. So we said about the sliding filament theory of the filaments going over the top of each other. You've made me talk about it again. So when you have those filaments going over the top of each other, sometimes they don't release, they don't relax and ease off again, which is one of the things, other than byproducts from energy systems, which clog up the muscle tissues. That's the two things predominantly, unless there are any more you've got for me, Dean. That's the two things predominantly that cause dysfunction within muscle tissue. So when you're going into to the myofascial release, so either with a trigger point ball, either self myofascial release, we've got the guns that come out as well now. Yeah, guns. That's one for you, Dave, with the wrap that you like. We've got all of those. Is it just one finger, is it?
Well, it depends. You can get 2 if you want. I don't know.
3.
Oh, wow.
So we're using the bit of kit that we do to put some pressure on that joint. So you're either rolling yourself on the joint, or you put pressure on the musculature and then you move the muscle over that apparatus, which will then ease off and free up that muscle fiber to then relax off and restore that range of movement. Give us a thumbs up, Dean, if that's pretty much ticking the box. Legend. So the mobility side of things, increasing that range of movement at joint, it may be because you have flexibility issues in that one muscle. That muscle may well have knots and stuff within it, which may mean that you need to have some of myofascial release. Either if you're lazy like Dave, you'll go and see your gym owner, who's a decent masseur, who will ease off pecs and serratus and
Whoa.
and his quad complex, because he's lazy as fuck when it comes to looking after his knee bowler.
It's a fair point. It's true.
It's true. It is just as easy to do it yourself. You're probably not going to do it justice if you do it yourself. Sarah, are you sports masseur as well? Not yet.
No, it's on the list of things to do when I'm allowed out of the house again. I do it. I do sports massage, but I've not like got the certificate to say I can.
I don't do sports massage. Is that one of those?
Start handing out business cards. Yeah, but it's not something, because I'm mostly NHS based. It's not something I have time or capacity to do a huge amount of, but that's changing. So yeah.
From a professional stance, from a physio side of things, would you add anything to what powerlifters and weightlifters? Joe, what's your sport? I appreciate you're on mute at the moment. What's your sport, Joe? What do you do?
Bobsleigh.
Bobsleigh. So predominantly sprinting. Cool. So actually power sports are quite relevant to you as well.
I would have laid money on it not being bobsleigh.
So I know full well that Joe's military, right?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, so she'll have got done that through the winter, the skiing and the winter sports side of things, I would make an assumption. So, Sarah, the physio, is there anything you would add to that side of things?
No, I think like interesting chat, and I think the sort of mobility versus power debate is kind of one of those, from my perspective, I always find a bit of a non-debate. Like I was like, oh, do you want to be mobile? You can be both. You need range of movement, and you then need to train your muscles to have control throughout that range of movement. So if you're only training half the range that you're creating, you're going to create weak points where you're likely to injure yourself. If you're training your muscle through the full range that you have available, then you're going to be strong and stable and able to lift really heavy things, lots, which is kind of what you're all after. So like it's not an either or, it's a you need to do a combination of both through full range to be safe and strong, and that's kind of it from my perspective. Which
everyone's after heavy things apart from Craig.
No, I'm not. I'm always after a heavy body weight, Dave. I just can't achieve it.
And for Craig's benefit, I get these lectures almost daily from Sarah, so it's.
Do you? And has this, the mobility and doing the right thing chat, has it made you a better athlete over the last 9 months, Gary?
Not really, no. If I go on mute and the video blanks out, it's so you can't see Sarah hitting me.
Strength and
find that Sarah the physio, Gary. Olivia, I'm pretty sure that answers your question. Anybody got any other burning questions?
Just to follow on from that discussion, actually, is there any real difference in terms of the mobility sort of stuff you might give an athlete as opposed to physio stuff that might be down to general maintenance, general rehab type thing, as opposed to, I don't know, sort of conditioning type mobility?
Do you want the simple answer?
Yeah.
No.
Perfect. Done.
However,
Thanks.
And I'm gonna pigeonhole Dean in this box as well. I know Dean has a good amount of experience of working with other athletes. We're both aware that prescribing things, and they're really bone exercises like bird dogs, dead bugs, really core controlled, stabilizing shoulder and hip movements, little small exercises that can just get used as a warm-up into the bigger exercises. Jefferson curls, pull-off
I
press.
don't like them.
I know you don't, Dave, but your spine
Awful.
needs to move better for your bench, so suck it up and stop being a little bitch.
That's what you're told.
I don't understand. You try and keep your back straight on a deadlift, and all of a sudden you're like, I just can't do it.
Let's finish this one first. So we have enough experience to know that that stuff needs to happen, or people like Sarah have too much work. Unfortunately, newer coaches within the industry, Dunning-Kruger theory, which is a little bit of knowledge makes you think that you have all the knowledge, which we see a lot with new coaches. We specifically see it with new PTIs coming fresh from the school because they're excited little bunnies. They have all this knowledge to give, and that's it. The longer you're in the game, the more you understand you kind of don't know, and there is to know. But you do develop the knowledge of understanding that actually prevention of injury, and you can only lift so much heavy stuff at once, is the long game that helps working relationships with things like physios and injury prevention. I think that covers it, yeah? So basically, either I'm going to give you glute bridges or Sarah's going to give you glute bridges.
I think it depends on the context as well, Craig.
Go on.
Just to add something to that, Gary, just obviously it's good that your wife is a physio. I tell you what, if my wife is a physio, God, I'd be bugging her all the time. But nevertheless, we got to think about the two different...
She's not the wife yet either, but she keeps bugging me about that too. So
Sorry, mate, I probably just dropped you in it there. I apologise. So, nevertheless, I'll stick my foot back in my mouth. But no, seriously, from you got to look at it two different ends of the spectrum here. If I, as a coach, am prescribing particular mobility exercises, it's there encompassed with what Craig mentioned before. It's there encompassed with stability. It's there with pauses and focusing on key positions. It might even be simple things like breathing correctly and trying to teach people how to brace properly when doing those mobility exercises. If I'm going to see a physio, or as an athlete, or one of my athletes goes to see a physio, that means that somewhere along that journey, we've done something wrong for that individual to then go and see a physio. And these are the two, although we may prescribe the same exercises in some way, shape or form, they're done in two very different ways. A physio often does these rehabilitation exercises or stability or mobility, whatever it may be, will often do that because it's from an injury standpoint, and they're there trying to increase the load or tension or volume that an athlete's doing before they can get back to full fitness. But as a coach, I would prescribe certain mobility exercises that are there as a preventative measure rather than I need to fix this person, or I've got to do this before they then go and see a physio. So although there may be some crossover with the exercises, there are some things, and I'm sure Craig will vouch. I don't know whoever, I think Mark mentioned Mark was a coach as well, that I might do some very anecdotal based mobility stuff that I found that works for my athletes. That may not be what a physio may prescribe, but I found it's what works. So there's always a bit of crossover between the two. And I think that's a really, really important thing to note, that if, as an athlete, if you can prevent that, then you're onto a winner straight away, rather than going to the cure, which is the physio. Do you know what I mean?
Perfect. Cheers, Dino. Any more burning questions, guys? Have we covered everything you want to cover?
You mentioned,
Go on, Claire.
bird dog and that kind of thing. Are there specific key exercises that you would say to do? Like a handful of exercises that are the best things to do on a regular basis? Or?
He's not happy.
He doesn't want to do any.
I'm going to go back to my original ploy, and Dean knows it's coming. I can see him sniggering already. It depends.
Depends.
Mm-hmm.
So, go on.
I didn't know if they were just sort of generalised ones that keep you moving.
So there are certain exercises that will give you additional stability through the knee joint, through the hip joint, through the ball and socket joint, through different spinal positions, through different planes of movement for the spine. It depends on what that athlete requires. A lot of the ones that I use are almost kind of standardy ones. So I like using bird dogs. Some people will be lucky enough to be given banded bird dogs because I hate you and I really want to make
Nasty man.
If anybody doesn't know what the exercises are and start to get confused over them, then I am more than happy to explain. Jefferson's I will explain in a minute because Dave fucking loves them. So bird dogs are one I really like. Dead bugs are really good because dead bugs really help you feel that lumbar spine position that you need to have rather than having that flattened out lumbar spine. You can do those banded as well. You can do dead bugs with arms banded and legs coming out. What else do I really like? Handstand holds I really like for stability of the shoulders. Sorry, Susie.
CrossFit.
CrossFit, yeah! But handstand holds do work really, really well for it.
Yep.
Dave doesn't get it because Dave's already really good at handstands. And again, if someone's really good at it, you can A, give it to them because it makes their little heart jump for joy, or you can B, give them something that's going to challenge them. And
Give them Jeffersons.
like Jeffersons.
Fucking Jeffersons.
So, does everybody just thumbs up or thumbs down if you do or don't know what Jeffersons are? Cool. We've got 3 or 4 that don't know. So Jeffersons, I won't give you a demonstration because my spine doesn't move as it should do. So if you, for example, oh, here we go.
The easiest way to demonstrate this. Oh, well, actually, I'm not saying that.
It's more of a do as I say, not as I do kind of thing.
What we could do is we could have the nearest naked person to demonstrate it just so we can see the muscles.
I was going to say, you could literally look at people at the competitions. Most of them Jefferson deadlift from a standing position.
A slight angle so that you can actually see me and not my dirt block. What we want
Dave, I'm on this call. Be nice.
Did you say nice and tall?
No, that's
You
all right.
want to be standing on something.
Craig, is that a max deadlift?
Double body weight.
So, what I'm
24 kilos.
This is 60 kilos. It's probably slightly too heavy. You should probably start fairly light. A Jefferson curl isn't designed to improve your deadlift. It's designed to improve the stability of the small muscular structures within the spine and intertwined in between the vertebrae. What we're looking to do from the top is to break at the neck of your T-spine, slowly break one vertebrae at a time down from your T-spine, peel down your L spine all the way down, and then peel all the way back up nice and slowly. So the idea is almost like a caterpillar. It should almost be tempoed as well, so it's kind of 10 seconds down, 10 seconds up. I would never prescribe, I shouldn't probably say that out loud, but it's very rare that I would prescribe more than 4 repetitions at once because it's so slow and controlled. But because it's so slow and controlled, it forces all the small musculature and connective tissue in and around the spine that's keeping the spine embedded in that cased position to work really hard. Start with an empty barbell. If your flexibility through the hip and hamstrings are really good and on the edge of a box and go through it as well. Very commonly used in weightlifting because of the additional mobility that's required. It is a really good warm-up before deadlifting. Sorry, Dave, but it is. It's a really good warm-up for those that you find now thoracic flexion through a conventional deadlift. We could do a whole session on it, so I'm not going to go into that in detail now, but we see the flexion in the thoracic spine when people deadlift. If it's nowhere near conventional 2.5 to 3 times body weight, your spine and your musculature in and around your thoracic spine isn't strong enough, so sort that out before you start adding weight to the bar in total. Unless you have some kind of spinal disorder, there's plenty of them out there that could be developed over time, etc., etc. I think that covers the Jefferson curl.
I'm assuming the Jefferson curl's your favourite.
It's one of my current favourites and has been for about 6 months.
When you say spinal disorder, was that taking the piss or was that a genuine, like...
Are we referring to people that we've seen deadlift, or?
No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't do that.
Are you referencing the person we mentioned right at the start before I started recording?
No, he's snowbacks. He doesn't curl.
But no, I'm more referring to Gen Pop. So probably one that, because I've done a little bit of personal training over the last 10 years. I've not done a lot of it. Mine is more kind of sports performance-y based, probably not to the extent that Dean has done. But Gen Pop, generally, you'll see that sort of things. My old man, for example, has something called ankylosing spondylitis, which causes calcification of the ligaments of the spine. So he is naturally in this hunch position. Clearly, he's not deadlifting, but someone who has AS would have that naturally hunch position.
Claire, is there a particular area that you feel as though you need to sort of gear your mobility towards more? Because that might be able to gear a better prescription of exercises that might be useful for you.
I've been doing more stuff recently on my ankle and hip just to help with like squat depth. Because to start with, the first few squats I find hard to get down to depth, and as I loosen up, it gets easier. So yeah, that more than anything, really.
I think that's so interesting you said that, because that goes back to Craig's initial point. Because if it's the depth that's the issue, and let's say you're seeing a rounding of your lumbar spine, or there's a specific, that, like we said before, that might be laziness, it might be tightness in the glutes, it might be a number of different things, but that sounds like it could be a range of movement flexibility issue rather than a mobility issue.
Yeah.
So it would warrant you doing and spending time focusing on things like banded distractions, stuff like static stretching. And I'm not talking from a short-term perspective. We're talking about real developmental stretching where you're spending a good 20-30 minutes focusing solely around ankle and hip stretches. Because if that's the issue, then again, there's a host of different exercises that you can focus on to increase your range of motion within your hip. Just as an example, you could do a banded pigeon pose, which takes the top of your femur where it sits into your hip capsule, it pulls it right back and sort of opens up your hip joint. That's just a typical static flexibility stretch.
And doing the
whereas
ankle stretches and that kind of thing, which I think has but yeah,
I think that's like Craig said, it's a depends question.